Hi my loves, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my March to May books, I think. And I am so excited to be sitting down with you today and just chatting books because it's been a while. I think it's obvious to most of you, but if it isn't, I had a baby in March. So these reviews probably not going to be my most sort of well thought through reviews I've ever done. I read a lot of them sort of in the middle of the night. So yes, I don't know how well I'm going to be able to speak about these books today, but I'm going to do my best. There's some interesting books in here today, which I'm looking forward to talking to you about. First of all, let's do next month's book club. So obviously we're a week or two into June, aren't we? So I doubt I'm going to get round to doing my June books until a week or two into July anyway. So there's still time to read this. But I thought we might read a collection of essays. I thought we might read David Sedaris' Calypso, which I bought the other day. I included it in a vlog. I think it's set in a beach house. I think it's going to be a nice sort of summery-ish book. So that's what we're going to read this month, and I really hope that we will enjoy it together. Let's get into the books before I start rambling. I haven't vlogged for a while either, and I do want to give you guys a little update, but I will save that all for a vlog, and I will be back to vlogging next week hopefully. So my book club pick from last time was The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu. I feel like I picked this in another life, but it actually took me a long while to get through it, like a really long time. So I think I only ended up finishing it at the beginning of May, and I think that's because I felt very mixed about this book. When I read the synopsis, when I read the introduction, I was like, wow, I'm really going to enjoy this book. It's right up my street. Can't wait to read it. But then I read the first few stories and I just couldn't help but feel quite disappointed with the first half of the stories, with a couple of exceptions. I think the second story, State Change, is a pretty good one. But yeah, the first half of the stories up until The Paper Menagerie, I was just not convinced by them at all. They were kind of like reading a Black Mirror episode sort of stuffed into a short story. You know, the best short stories, the form and the content are really perfectly married. You know, they are a short story because they have to be a short story. Whereas these really felt like, I'm going to take an idea, I'm going to make it a short story, and bam, completed. And I just couldn't connect with them for whatever reason. The writing felt a bit juvenile as well. I hate it when I have to say that, but it did feel a little bit juvenile for me in that first half. But then the second lot of stories were a lot more inventive, complex, interesting. Really captured my attention a bit more. I still sometimes found it a bit hard to connect to them. The tone just felt off sometimes. The characters felt a little bit two-dimensional, and I often actually felt that the tone and the balance of the stories were off. Like they would sort of be needlessly violent in a way that didn't serve the narrative, or they would just harp on a point a little bit too long. So sometimes I felt it difficult to connect with them even when I thought the ideas were much more interesting. At other times I thought they were really moving. I really enjoyed the attention paid to Chinese and Japanese history throughout, and the combination of history and sci-fi is really it's one of my favourite things in literature. So in conclusion, I did just feel a bit confused about this collection. I just didn't know whether I was liking it, really strongly disliking it, was a bit meh about the whole thing. I just went through the full range of emotions. So yes, I think the second half of the stories are the ones that have won the awards and all of that sort of thing. So I do think there's a reason why those ones are his more famous works. And I know that he said in the introduction, I think, that he wanted to include some stories that he felt hadn't received recognition. But I have to say, I think it was probably those stories that I enjoyed less. So yeah, I'd be interested to know what you thought. Lots of people absolutely adore this book. A few people sort of felt like me from what I could tell from the Goodreads reviews. Yeah, not sure what to make of it, but I am kind of intrigued by his other writing. But I have to say, his other famous trilogy that he wrote, or series, starts with The Grace of Kings. I think it's a military fantasy. I have to say, they're not always my favourite. I'm a little bit wary of them after having read the Poppy War. So I don't know whether I'll try that, but I might keep an eye out for his other work in the future. Unless you guys say I will love it, in which case I might give it a try. I feel so out of practice talking for long periods of time, and also particularly talking about books. So if I seem out of practice, I'm sorry. My mouth and brain are not communicating with one another today. Right, The Book of Colin by M.R. Carey. So this is a post-apocalyptic novel. It's the first in a series about Colin. He is a young boy living in a village in England, England spelt with an I, in the distant future. And in this distant future, trees have become aggressive and dangerous due to some sort of dodgy bioengineering that went on in the distant past. A lot of the past has been forgotten, and humans live in these little villages with tall walls and kind of keep close together and live in fear of trees. And also I think some of the animals have been bioengineered and running rampant all over the shop. So it's a dangerous world, and that is the world that Colin grows up in. So this book is definitely a little bit of coming of age. So we have that running throughout, definitely. Colin, you know, comes to realise that the world isn't as it seems, his village isn't as it seems, and he's becoming disaffected, and he wants to get out and explore and make a name for himself, essentially. And it's written in a kind of pidgin English, you know, in a sort of what Carey imagines future English would be like. So that's, I assume, where the kind of style comes from. I think it works. However, this is one of those books that sort of sets up the trilogy. So as a standalone novel, it's not as satisfying as maybe I wanted it to be. So it started off good, and then by the time we got to about 150 pages, it began to kind of drag, and I was like, where are we going with this? Are we going to get somewhere here? And in the end, it didn't quite go as far as I wanted it to go. So other examples would of course be Patrick Rothfuss's trilogy, With the Name of the Wind, being a novel that really sets up the other novels and doesn't go that far. But then the problem was that The Wise Man's Fear also didn't go anywhere. Just my opinion, guys. So that would be an example of that sort of thing. Whereas if we look at N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy, for example, the 5th season is quite satisfying in and of itself, but then you get the other 2 books as well. So I do think the latter style is better, really, but I have purchased the next book just to see where this goes. So it definitely intrigued me enough because, you know, it does sound like my kind of thing. We've got some trees in there, we've got bioengineering, post-apocalyptic vibes going on. It's certainly not as weird as Jeff Vandermeer's fiction, which features a lot of those themes in a very different kind of style. But yes, I will read the next one, I think, and see how we go. It was solid, this, but it wasn't like, oh my goodness, amazing, definitely need to read the next one right now sort of thing. Speaking of Jeff Vandermeer, we've got Dead Astronauts, which is one of my favourite covers of recent years. It's just so cool. A holographic hardcover one came out when he first released it, and I am forever sad that I did not get my hands on it. Anyway, Dead Astronauts. Now, this book is not going to appeal to everyone, that is for sure. It is one of the strangest books I've ever read, and I read a lot of strange books, I feel. I've read other Vandermeer, so it's definitely up there. It's kind of difficult to know where to start with it. Okay, so I've started to call these like randomly off the top of my head. I haven't really thought about this, but books like this, thesis novels, because they deserve a lot more unpacking than I will be able to do in this short review. There's so much stuffed into a book like this that it's impossible to talk about for a few minutes, and it would require a lot more work on my behalf to really delve into everything that's going on here. But anyway, let's start with what it's about, kind of. This is set in the same universe as Bourne, which you may remember I read last year, so I think he might be writing more novels in this world, I'm not sure. But anyway, it's in a completely different style, so you could read these 2 books separately and never read the other one and have a fulfilling experience. Plus, they're not really in the same timeline. you know, you could read both as standalone novels, but they are set within the same universe. Born is a first-person narrative. It's much more readable than this. It's still totally weird, but much more readable as a first-person narrative. It's got kind of a main character that you focus on and learn about. This one is more like a post-apocalyptic parable, or fairy tale, or, I don't know, dreamscape. It's very odd. It's much more sort of removed, I suppose. It's got a sort of remove to it, to the narration, hence why I say things like parable and fairy tale. It really pushes the boundaries of narrative fiction. It's sort of sometimes like a prose poem. It experiments with everything from genre to form to typeface, and yeah, to put it succinctly, it's just very experimental in general. So the main push of the narrative is that it's following these three characters, the dead astronauts. You may, if you've read Born, sort of recognise that, it may ring a bell, and they are trying to battle the company across parallel universes or parallel worlds. The company being some huge, you know, conglomerate that echoes the sort of big tech giants of our own lives. You know, they seem to sort of, like a virus, spread across all the cities of the globe, and they end up experimenting a lot and doing a lot of bioengineering and trying to create new life and all sorts of things that have serious moral and ethical complications. But even whilst doing this and doing all this bioengineering, they can't see the life in life that isn't human life. So yes, it's got all of that going on, as well as so much more. And yeah, something I wrote in my review is that I love with Vandermeer, a lot of the novels are very, very different. Like, compare this to Born, to Annihilation, to A Peculiar Peril, A City of Saints and Madmen. A lot of them have quite different styles, quite different voices, but they all feel very Vandermeer, and they all look at the same sort of things at differing levels, differing styles, and to differing depths. This one really, really dives deep into the themes that Vandermeer loves the most, and I think if you were to really go in and analyse this, you would have so much to play with here. Whereas something like, at least Annihilation, it gets a little bit weirder as the series goes on, is a lot more, it's a bit more accessible, still sort of looking at those themes. So yes, I just love that about him as an author. I feel like he's always experimenting, but things still feel distinctly his own. There's lots of very beautiful moments in here. It will require a little bit of concentration from you, a little bit of focus. This is a book I'll be coming back to at a time when my brain isn't so split. Beautiful book, and very strange and very moving. And yes, I don't have any more to say about it because I feel like you kind of destroy the magic a little bit. You just kind of have to dive into it. So let's talk about Ghost Wall next by Sarah Moss. I listened to this one. It made for a good audiobook for the most part, apart from the narrator's northern accent, which sometimes left a little to be desired. But in general, it made for a good audiobook, I thought. So this is a book about Sylvie. She's on a sort of weird camping expedition with her dad and her mum, and they're supposed to be reenacting the Iron Age, essentially, for a few days in summer, with a professor and his group of students who are studying the Iron Age, and her dad is a sort of amateur enthusiast that, I can't remember exactly how, but ends up on this trip with the professor. I think he's friends with the professor or just somehow got himself involved. Basically, a lot of it is about Sylvie's relationship to her father, who is abusive and controlling, sort of supposed to mirror the experience of the Iron Age women and girls, I think. At the same time, there's class conflicts going on between Sylvie and her family and the professor and his students. There's sort of various things being looked at here. And the novel works up to this climax, which I almost missed because I was listening to it, so make sure you're listening carefully towards the end of the book because it is a little bit blink and you'll miss it. So I know Sarah Moss has lots of fans, so I'm a bit reluctant to say that I found this novel to be mostly just fine. It was good, but I was expecting a lot more, so I think that sort of knocked it down a few pegs for me because, you know, when you're expecting much more from an author, especially because this sort of book sounded like right up my street. I'm so loving my historical novels at the minute, and I thought there'd be a lot more Iron Age stuff in it. There isn't. There's actually a lot less than I thought there would be. So yeah, when you're expecting a lot, it can feel more disappointing when you don't get it. The prose is nice enough. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't particularly bad. But yeah, I feel like she really just touched on some of those issues that I just pointed to. But she didn't really go into great detail about anything. It didn't feel like the novel had real proper depth to it. It's quite a short little novel and it really just raced through a lot of it. And I find this a lot with books. They sort of point to or lightly touch on some of these big topics, but the novels I love the best are the ones that really do it in such a way as you get some of the depth to the issue, some of the grey areas, and there's real discussion that feels right for the novel. So yeah, my favourite books are when you get a little bit more, and with this book I felt like it was one that you didn't get enough. So yes, sorry to say I didn't love this. I might try some more Sarah Moss in the future, but I'm not sure. The next book is a nice little thriller. It's Magpie Lane by Lucy Atkins. I got a weird mix of books, by the way, you guys. I read a lot of these on my Kindle or listened to them, and I've bought some of them secondhand, but I haven't bought all of them. But anyway, Magpie Lane by Lucy Atkins, that's the next book to talk about. This was mostly very enjoyable. It's told from the point of view of a Scottish nanny working in Oxford. She has been looking after one of the master's children, a little girl who is eccentric, also very troubled. She lost her mother at a young age and she doesn't really get on with her stepmother. Her father's kind of a strange figure, and yes, it's a bit of a dysfunctional household, and the nanny really takes this little girl, really takes her under her wing. They manage to find ways of communicating with one another. The little girl doesn't speak a lot, and then the girl goes missing. So it kind of starts in a police interview room with this nanny, and they're interviewing her to find out if she knows anything. And she's narrating the novel, so you kind of got a little bit of that unreliable narrator thing going on. I found this gripping. It's got a kind of modern gothic edge, which I love. It's set in Oxford. It's got all of those sorts of vibes. And I think Atkins does a really good job of keeping the tension throughout, really building that atmosphere, building the world. The only thing I was sort of disappointed by was that I ultimately found it a little bit predictable, and the ending was a little bit flat for me because I had sort of predicted it. You know, endings are so hard with thrillers, and the fact that I was kind of interested throughout some of my earliest night feeds in the first few weeks of the little one's life when I was so tired, I was still interested enough to pick this up in the middle of the night and read it. So I think that speaks to something. And yeah, I'll definitely be keeping Lucy Atkins on my radar for when I want something similar again, just something that will keep me gripped. I'm going to talk about 3 Hours next, and then I'll come back to another book, but this is 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton. So I thought off the back of Magpie Lane I might enjoy another sort of thriller. I thought this was a thriller. I mean, it is. It's certainly thrilling, or supposed to be thrilling, but it's a little bit different. I thought I would, enjoy another one. This one I enjoyed, but I think it has some pretty big flaws. It's about a school held hostage by some gunmen, and it's about the 3 excruciating hours in their lives, in the gunmen's lives, in the police's lives, in the parents' lives. Yes, we're looking at that 3 hours in kind of agonising detail, and it's, you know, you really feel the tension. It is a page turner, at least it was for me. Some readers do say it's a little bit boring because it sort of wanders a little bit, so you'll go to a character and then you'll get a little bit of their backstory maybe, or something that they're thinking about or remembering, so you are moving outside of those 3 hours too. I personally like that. I feel like it gives quite an accurate portrayal of what those 3 hours would feel like, which is simultaneously extremely fast and also agonisingly slow, and you're really thinking about everything. I feel like it was an engaging way of approaching this topic. The writing is elegant, the characters are nicely fleshed out. But by the end I did feel it was kind of a little bit overly sentimental. It probably had some flaws in the way it presents school shootings. It relied on a bit of a simplification of some political issues and social issues, and there were some predictable elements and parts of the ending that I was like, ugh, this doesn't feel very realistic anymore. However, did it keep me engaged? Yes. Did I enjoy it? Yes, I mostly enjoyed this one, but yes, quite heavily flawed. Okay, my loves, the next book is The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey. For some reason, whenever I speak about this book, sorry about the sun coming in and out, by the way, I know that it looks crazy. It is the fun British summertime. For some reason, whenever I've talked about this book before, I've called it The Mermaid and the Black Conch. No idea why, because I know that the place that the book is set in is called Black Conch. Some of my favourite authors are Caribbean. It's one of my favourite places that fiction comes from in this world. So I so wanted to love Roffey's The Mermaid of Black Conch. She is a Trinidadian British author, I think. So yes, I was really, really excited about it, especially because it had got some really glowing reviews. As the title would suggest, it's about an ancient mermaid captured off the coast of an imaginary Caribbean island called Black Conch. Now, I am very sad. I have an ever-growing list of all style, no substance books, and this is one of them. It has a very distinct, very kind of purple prosy, poetic style, which I wouldn't usually mind too much if the depth was there, but sadly for me, I didn't get the depth that I wanted to from this book. Roffey does kind of touch on some interesting ideas about gender, race and colonialism, but yeah, I think this book, sort of like I said about Ghost Wall, really just kind of briefly touches on those ideas, hints at them, sort of maybe even says them, but doesn't explore them fully. This plot was a bit slow and repetitive, and the characters were pretty two-dimensional, sort of just, yeah, like cardboard cutouts of characters. And there was something very odd going on about desire and ownership in this book, which I couldn't quite put my finger on. I didn't kind of trace it throughout. Sometimes you need to do that to figure out what's wrong, but something was just coming across a bit off about the presentation of desire, ownership and gender. Something was happening there which I wasn't a big fan of. Some reviewers that I saw on Goodreads pointed out a lot of logical flaws in some of the narrative, which I won't go into. It just felt a bit clumsy and underdeveloped. There was some beauty to the language for sure, but yeah, ultimately it just rang a bit hollow for me, and it felt so long and slow, which is unusual for such a slim novel. I think it might have worked a bit better as a short story maybe, as opposed to a novel. It felt very stretched, like just stretched thin, and really relying on its language, and for me it just didn't quite work. So I'm sad about that because I so wanted to love it, but yeah, not my favourite, I'm afraid. I think I'm going to skip any Roffey in the future. Okay, friends, we are almost at the end. Okay, next up, let's talk Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This was my least favourite book of the last 3 months. Oh my goodness. I know this gets a lot of love. People love it. It's a bit of a classic. It's from the 50s or something, isn't it? Lots of you have recommended it to me before, so I am so sorry for what I'm about to say. Please, if you love Flowers for Algernon, I would honestly suggest just skipping my review entirely, because I don't want to ruin this book for you, but it was not for me, people. It was not for me. Yeah. It was one of those books that kind of rubbed me the wrong way and just annoyed me throughout, and I kept reading, and I don't really know why I kept reading, but I just kept getting more and more annoyed by it. Anyway, it's about Charlie, who has been born with a low IQ, enough that he has to receive support and help in his day-to-day life. And essentially he's been come across by some scientists who are going to do some procedure on him and his IQ is going to exponentially shoot upwards. So there was so much that I didn't like about this book. One of the things is its heavy reliance on psychoanalysis, Freudian themes, and dreams, all of which I just found insufferable. It's just a pet peeve of mine. I find that body of theory very unconvincing. I don't like it. I find it a bit misogynistic. Not for me. So there was a lot of that in here, and it was not for me. And I think that's obviously heavily influenced by when this was written and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, not for me. Lots of problems with the depiction of Charlie, I think, probably. Again, I haven't really traced it throughout the novel, but I certainly don't think it would stand up very well from an ableist standpoint. Yeah, so it made me kind of uncomfortable at various points. The depiction of women is really not great. And I didn't really particularly feel that the writing was great either. Like, the style of the writing wasn't amazing either. So I didn't like the content, didn't like the style. Yeah, I should have really given up with it, but because it's a classic, I was like, I'm just going to push through, but I shouldn't have. But if you want a really good take on this idea, Ted Chiang's short story, Understand, is so much better without the kind of ableism involved. There's no Freudianism in that, and it's so good. I think it's in the Story of Your Life book, I think. So much better than this, in my opinion. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Okay, final book to talk about is Horse Heaven by Jane Smiley. Very different sort of book. So this is a big book. As you can see, I read it on my Kindle. This is a second-hand copy that I bought. It's a big old book, and it took me a few weeks to read it over my night feeds and whatever in the middle of the night. You really kind of, I feel like when I think of those times, I'm going to associate this book with them. So even though this book is not like a standout from an objective standpoint, I feel a kind of connection to it, and it will forever remind me of that time in my life. But this is Horse Heaven. It's about the world of horse racing in the US. It's about the trainers, the owners, the jockeys, the breeders, everyone horse obsessed, living in that world. It's kind of a bubble in and of itself. You know, I don't hear much about it, but for those who are in it, it is their life. Now, just want to preface this by saying we all know horse racing is a pretty cruel sport. I don't condone it in real, actual life. And this book does kind of romanticise it to a degree, so be aware of that. If that's something that's particularly important to you or will serve as a trigger for you, then yeah, just be warned. Smiley has written about horses a lot over her career. It's clear that she finds them and the industry that surrounds them very interesting, so this book is part of that for her. But also, she's using the track as a kind of microcosm for life, as you can imagine, and just looking at all the different types of people, the different types of things that can happen in life, the different approaches to life. It's a classically good piece of Smiley writing. In my opinion, she is one of the best American realist novelists working in recent years, contemporary novelist that, yeah, is still publishing. Her prose is just so relaxed, it's assured, it's readable, it's confident. She's got those moments of poignancy in there, she's got those funny moments in there, it's quite warm and enjoyable to read. I love the depth of knowledge that she puts in, you know, all the little intricacies about how life on the track works, how looking after horses works. I find that sort of thing very fascinating. She does it with her like kind of farming stuff as well in some of her other books, going into that little minutiae. I find it really interesting. I find it interesting to learn about anything that's kind of complex that I don't know about, but to some readers it will be a bit boring, which I can also understand. You know, her characters are great, they're fully fleshed out, they're all a bit flawed, they're all a bit lovable, not all of them. She's got some excellent animal characters in here. There's an amazing Jack Russell, there's a couple of really good horses, who you sort of read from the point of view of as well, which I love. I love when she adds in splashes of magic into her sort of realist writing, because I think that actually makes it more real, because life does have those sort of magical feelings and magical moments in it. So writing from the point of the view of the animals is great for me. I very much enjoyed it. Nonetheless, this is a lengthy novel. It won't appeal to everyone. It is about a large cast of characters talking about horse racing, going about sort of sometimes mundane lives. There is drama in here, there is stuff going on, but it is approached in Smiley's sort of classic calm and collected style. So it's a little bit understated. It's not going to appeal to readers that do want a little bit more drama, a little bit more action. It is, yeah, in lots of ways, just as I'm discovering classic Smiley, I would file this one under Moo and the Last 100 Years trilogy. They also have this big cast of characters, this sort of occasional minutiae, mundanity sort of aspect. Moo being about a university campus, the Last 100 Years trilogy following a family throughout 100 years. So it's got that sort of vibe to it. The Greenlanders and 1,000 Acres and Good Faith are a little bit different, but these ones all have that same vibe to them. So if you liked those, then you might like this as well. It's not an incredible book, but it's just like a solid piece of writing. And if it sounds like it would appeal to you, then I would definitely pick it up. Okay, friends, that is it. My camera battery is flashing at me. I don't want it to cut out before I can say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching today. Don't forget about Calypso, and I will see you in my next book video, which I'm very excited for. Hopefully I will finish some of the books I'm currently reading. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye!